Hello, everybody. It's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We have reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. Now, today, November 5th, is actually Love Your Lawyer Day. And so I thought, why not shine a little bit of light on this career that can sometimes be pretty highly vilified? I mean, we've all heard jokes about ambulance chasers, and there are countless examples of cruel, unscrupulous lawyers throughout literature and film and theater. When in reality, it's a profession like any other one where there are plenty of people who honestly just really want to help people. So, I thought, why not put together a little list of films that really highlight those types of attorneys and lawyers instead of the ones that we're rather used to seeing. Now, Love Your Lawyer Day was created in 2001, sort of in order to fight back against the more negative stereotypes. And I think the films that I put together today, if nothing else, will make you think about attorneys, think about really good causes and things that attorneys can do in order to aid those causes. And hopefully, you'll also find them really, really entertaining. I know I do. These courtroom dramas have a tendency to do a really great job of pulling you in to intense and sometimes really important stories. So I think you'll probably find something that you like within one of these. I've got some that are funny, some that are really, really dramatic, and I think genre-wise it really does a good job of running the gamut. So in any case, as always, all of these recommendations are available to you entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card, and they're going to be available on one of our video services. This week we're highlighting Hoopla Digital and Canopy. And so without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the recs. Okay, so my first recommendation is available on Hoopla Digital, and it is for the comedy classic at this point, My Cousin Vinny. I love this movie. I loved this movie when I first saw it when I was a kid and probably only understood about half of what was going on. And I love it even more now that I can seriously appreciate the acting and the storyline and everything that goes into making it such a fun movie to watch. Now, in My Cousin Vinny, we're telling the story of these two young men who are traveling across Alabama. They are complete and utter fish out of water in that area. And then they end up getting mistakenly arrested and charged with murder, a murder that they absolutely did not commit. And they're really at a loss. They end up in this sort of courtroom drama circumstance, and they have no idea what to do. Thankfully, one of them has a cousin who is an attorney and is sent down there to take care of them. But unbeknownst to them, this cousin is really fresh out of the bar. He has no experience with trial law whatsoever. It doesn't really look like he has experience with law of any kind. And he's even more of a fish out of water in a backwoods Alabama town than they are. So this obviously causes even more problems. Not only is he totally out of his element and completely confused with the entire situation, but he also brings down his absolutely ludicrous girlfriend, and she's just one more completely out there ridiculous thing to add into the mix. Now, I've got to say, without his leather-clad girlfriend, I don't know if I would love this movie anywhere near as much as I do, because let me tell you, Vinny, who's played by Joe Pesci, and his girlfriend, played by Marissa Tomei, are what make this movie magical. They have the best on-screen chemistry. It's kind of ridiculous. It's really like watching a 1930s or 40s screwball comedy. It's that snappy, the dialogue is that quick, and they just have this general vibe that works so, so well. I am absolutely fascinated by the fact that they have such good chemistry, because if you're familiar with Joe Pesci's work, like Goodfellas and movies that are definitely steeped in mob culture, He's definitely not someone you would think of as like a romantic comedy kind of guy. Uh, but for whatever reason, their chemistry is nuts. It really does just sort of jump off the screen. You can't look away. They're hilarious. Um, Tomei plays this outlandish character, but at the same time you absolutely adore her and you really believe her. It kind of feels a little bit Judy Holliday-esque. You know, if you've ever seen the old Born Yesterday, it's certainly over the top. It's almost a caricature of a person, but it also feels kind of real at the same time, which makes absolutely no sense, but it's just the way it is. Um, this role actually garnered Tomei a Best Supporting Actress Oscar, which is crazy when you think of like the kinds of roles that you generally get. It's not this loud, snappy, opinionated girl from Brooklyn. You're usually looking at like the dramatic, heavy roles played by people like Kate Winslet and Frances McDormand. You know, names that are usually in that sort of winner's circle. So this is kind of out of nowhere, and I am totally here for that. I love that she won. Um, anyway, the film revolves around this concept of the outsiders and all of the antics that they get into, but alongside that otherness, they're all very, very smart and clever in their own way, and showing these little pockets of brilliance really, really make this whole courtroom comedy sing. Um, there is a really ridiculously famous scene with Marissa Tomei with regard to her knowledge of cars, of like classic muscle cars. And they play it all the time in things like AFI or any film comedy countdown, because this is always part of those countdowns. And it's just amazing. You can absolutely see why it's a scene that's always mentioned, because it is brilliantly done. So anyway, if you really like comedies, if you like fish out of water stories, if you like screwball romances, like anything classic, say like with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, or Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant, that kind of quick-witted banter that just never stops. Check out My Cousin Vinny. It is hilarious, it is fun, it's really sweet in places, and you're definitely going to have a good time with it. Okay, my next recommendation is also available on Hoopla Digital, and it is for a film that's essentially the polar opposite of My Cousin Vinny, and that is Witness for the Prosecution. Now, this Agatha Christie tale has been adapted many, many times. This particular one I'm talking about right now is the 2016 BBC miniseries adaptation. It's 2 parts, and it is phenomenal. Now, even if you're super familiar with the classic 1957 adaptation that Billy Wilder did, I still think that you absolutely need to watch this, because the 2016 version is much more closely aligned to the original short story that Agatha Christie wrote. The 1957 version is actually very close to the stage play that she personally adapted later on. So very, very different styles, very, very different endings, especially. So even if you love the 1957 version, this one has some different twists that I think you'll absolutely love. Anyway, so in this particular tale, we're in 1920s London, where this horrific murder has just occurred. Brutal, bloodthirsty, just terrifically bad murder on a beautiful widow named Emily French. According to her maid, this young upstart named Leonard Vole seduced her mistress, the widow, and eventually convinced her to leave him all of her goods and assets, thus prompting the heinous murder. You know, the prosecution paints a very vivid picture of the situation. Vole is an opportunist. He has no morals. He's just some ne'er-do-well who seduced this sweet, innocent widow into a life of debauchery. And it's a very convincing story. We have no idea what else might be going on. That's all we've got to go from. Now, Leonard is assigned, this nobody solicitor named Mayhew. He doesn't really believe in the case or the cause. He's just there because that's his job. But as he gets to know Leonard, he becomes more and more convinced of the young man's innocence. And, he becomes dedicated to the idea of saving this innocent man's life. Because, as I mentioned, that prosecution team has just painted a terrible, terrible picture. And the jury is absolutely being taken in by this tale. Mayhew is absolutely certain, however, of Leonard's innocence, so they've got to figure out a way to build a case. Leonard is sure that his wife can prove his innocence, providing him with an alibi, but is she going to be willing to? He was, in fact, having an affair with this widow, so where are her loyalties going to lie? There are so many twists and turns in this story. I had been familiar with the classic version, the 1957's film version, so some of the twists were already familiar to me, and some of them were absolutely not. I mean, some of them just took me by complete and utter surprise. So, I had so much fun while I was watching this, and it is so well acted. The cast is amazing. Toby Jones plays Mayhew, and he just does this incredible job of playing essentially a man living a life of quiet desperation would be the best description. He's just existing. He's neither happy nor devastated. He's just there. And this trial and this drive to save this young man, to save Leonard, it builds this fire under him, and he suddenly has a reason to really exist. And watching that passion grow, and this dedication to building a case is really exciting to watch. And that's part of why all of these twists and turns are rather emotionally taxing, to be honest. And again, I'm familiar with the story. I'd never read the short story. I'd never read the short story that this was originally based off of. I'd only seen stage play version and the film version. So really, I was coming at it from only half a familiarity kind of viewpoint, I guess. In any case, all of the characters are so beautifully fleshed out and performed, whether we're talking about Toby Jones's performance as Mayhew or we're talking about Kim Cattrall as Emily French. She's so... It's such a Kim Cattrall kind of performance. It's a little bit meta, to be honest, but it works. I mean, this sort of blousy, like, just do as you will kind of woman who is a bit of a hedonist in some ways. And again, we never really know 100% what's the truth, because we're always getting a depiction of the events. It's always this case being brought either against or for Leonard. So, maybe she wasn't really so laissez-faire about things. Maybe she was. And all of the other little characters, the witnesses for the prosecution, but also the people they bring for the defense. It's just all of these little puzzle pieces falling into place. And it's just electrifying. Really, truly, I loved this adaptation so much. And I wasn't really expecting that much. BBC does phenomenal miniseries. But as I mentioned, I was super familiar with the story already. So I was like, what could this possibly bring to the table? A lot. That's what it could bring to the table. A lot. So if you love mysteries, if you like things that would have legitimate twists and turns that you probably won't see coming, if you enjoy Agatha Christie's writing in general, if you like really tightly woven mystery stories, absolutely check out the 2016 Witness for the Prosecution on Hoopla. Exceptional adaptation that shows lawyers certainly in a different light than we're used to, but just in general tells a fantastically engrossing story. As always, that link is going to be available in the description box, but I'm also going to link to the classic 1957 Billy Wilder adaptation. That is available on Canopy, just so you have the two and you can choose. Each story has massive merits to it, so you can't go wrong, to be honest. But I just want to make sure both of those are available to you for quick access. Both of them excellent recommendations, by the way. So please, please, please check out Witness for the Prosecution, whether you go for the 2-part miniseries or the classic original film. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. Okay, my next recommendation, which is also available on Hoopla Digital, is for a film based on a true story, which is terrifying, and that is the movie A Civil Action. Now, at the beginning of A Civil Action, we're dealing with an attorney who is pretty similar to what we consider stereotypical lawyers in films. He's cynical, he is pretty unscrupulous in ways. He's a personal injury attorney who is definitely looking for the big payday. So the fact that he associates himself with this particular case is fascinating. In this case that we witness, we're dealing with a group of people who have had to deal with, horrible circumstances where children have died. People in general have been hurt by 2 very large companies and contamination of a water supply. Again, I'd just like to stress that this is based on a true story, so it kind of makes it more terrifying than any of the horror films that I recommended in the last couple of weeks. So this attorney takes on this case primarily at first because he thinks it's going to bring him both prestige and big bucks. But as time goes by, he gets more and more wrapped up in the stories of these people and the situation itself, and he becomes quite obsessed with the idea of both winning the case, but also of justice being served, at least in some small way. And I say obsessed, and I mean obsessed. And it really is fascinating to watch this lawyer kind of unravel. Schlichtman is played by John Travolta. I've never, ever been a Travolta fan. I was not a fan of Grease. I've not been a big follower of his career. But he does an exceptional job in this role. He really does play this sort of smarmy guy at the beginning of the film, and watching the evolution of the character is really interesting. It's neither a building up nor a dragging down of the character to say he really begins to crumble. And there's some serious tragedy. There's some very tragic elements in a character that, as he finds like a heart-centered goal, watching him kind of fall apart at the same time. And in that regard, it's incredibly moving. Now, you've also got the stories of all of the people who've been hurt by these companies, but one woman in particular stands out, her story, where she ends up losing her child. These sort of message movies, the mileage may vary if they're being too preachy, if they are just glossing over the issues, but I think this film in particular does a very good job of showing us the layers of these characters. And it is very, very much, just a based upon story. They leave out a lot of elements that happened in the real cases. The meat of change happens essentially in the epilogue of this film, but I really enjoyed watching all of the characters interact and how circumstances changed all of them, how different characters find like a heart-centered nature, or how different characters manage to navigate incredibly difficult situations. And at no point did I ever feel any of the actors had sort of gone over the top with the characters, which I think in these kinds of films would be pretty easy to do. They always stayed very believable, and I was really, really very impressed. Again, you've got John Travolta playing Schlichtman. You've got villains that aren't mustache twirlers necessarily. They are people too, but their objective is to protect these big companies. So, it could easily slide into that mustache twirl style of performance, and it doesn't. You've got excellent performances from Robert Duvall, William H. Macy, John Lithgow. I mean, the cast is just amazing. So, not only do you have this very complex storyline with a lot of really great character development, but you've also got really phenomenal performers in those roles that are quite pivotal. Um, the story is so compelling in general just because you know that it's based on a real situation, but the adaptation of that is also really well done. So if you like courtroom drama in general, if you like stories based on true happenings, if you like multifaceted characters especially, please check out A Civil Action. It's really, 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 really solid. I don't know that I would call it like entertaining because it is very distressing in parts, but it's one that I'm so glad that I finally watched. I had not watched it before I was prepping this particular segment, so it was a really great find for me. Anyway, please check out A Civil Action. It is available on Hoopla. I think you'll really like it. Okay, moving right along to my Canopy recommendations. The first of those is for the fictionalized version of the 1925 Scopes Monkey Trial, Inherit the Wind. Now, there are a ton of adaptations of this particular story, but the one that I'm recommending today is the 1960s, well, in my opinion, definitive version starring Spencer Tracy. It's just such a fascinating story. I mean, you're based on a real, true situation, but then you've got these phenomenal actors playing these fictionalized versions of real people. There's just something about that whole idea that I just absolutely adore. Anyway, in Inherit the Wind, we're dealing with 1920s Tennessee, where a young school teacher named Bertram Cates is currently on trial for violating Butler law. Now, Butler law essentially said at the time that you could only teach creationism in schools, even public schools. You couldn't teach Darwinism or evolution. It was just illegal. I won't get into the reasons, but he decides to go ahead and teach Darwinism, and he gets in trouble for it. He's vilified by many of the townspeople, including the town preacher, who denounces him, says all kinds of crazy, horrible things about him, and also happens to be his potential father-in-law because, Cates is engaged to his daughter. I mean, there's all kinds of like mini dramas going on. In any case, the town puts together its prosecution, which is led by Matthew Harrison Brady, who is really, really famous for being, a very conservative, upright attorney nationally. On the defense side of things, you have Henry Drummond, who is essentially Brady's counterpoint. He's a rather famous agnostic-leaning lawyer who has far more liberal ideas and a liberal interpretation of the law. And these two attorneys have gone head-to-head together many, many times. They've been on opposite sides of one another countless situations. And this particular case is sort of the culmination of all those years of antagonism. And it just builds this phenomenal tension from the very get-go. And of course, you're dealing with a pretty sensitive topic to begin with. Even today, while I think it's less of a hot button issue, it's still frequently debated, whether creationism should be taught in public schools or not. And I do find that when you've got these stories that still remain to an extent relevant, it's always going to evoke some kind of like visceral emotion in your audience, whether you're for one side or the other. So you've got this story that's steeped in truth, because of course this is based on the Scopes Monkey trial, where you had like very, very famous attorneys coming to this teeny tiny town to either prosecute or defend a young man who was on trial for teaching evolution. The real life Matthew Harrison Brady was William Jennings Bryan, and the real life Henry Drummond was Clarence Darrow, who also had a contentious real life relationship where they fought against one another many, many times. So you've got this level of meta truth, but you've also got really phenomenal actors in these key roles. Like Spencer Tracy is always phenomenal, but he just does such a good job as Henry Drummond. I mean, he's just an amazing, amazing performer. And, Frederick March plays Brady, and I'd only ever seen March in a couple of things. A movie called My Favorite Year, which is very heavily drama based, and it was just not for me. So I wasn't really sure, the first time I watched this, like what to expect or how to feel. And probably the first time I watched it, I don't even know if I'd seen that particular film of his prior to. But I remember thinking that, he was phenomenal in this role, as this very comfortable um, theologian. Really, I mean, he definitely knows his Bible, and is not afraid to debate it. He's very respectable in that way. So you see these two brilliant performers playing incredibly intelligent men who are not afraid of fighting in front of one another, who will go head to head, who will debate semantics, and it just makes for seriously exciting moments in the courtroom. And besides that, you've got all of the outside elements, the media, you've got the town's preconceived notions of what is going on and what's right and wrong already, aside from actual law. It's just, it feels very relevant. I mean, it even though this particular situation would likely not happen today, you feel like everything surrounding it happens all the time anyway. You see it in the news, you read about it in the newspapers, it feels like something that is going on right now. And I love films that are able to do that, that are still able to evoke such a response. So if you are looking for something like that, if you like stories based on true situations, if you like extraordinary drama, incredibly solid acting, Inherit the Wind may be for you. I'm also, in addition to linking to this particular adaptation, going to link to a 1999 adaptation that's available on Hoopla. But I do think you should definitely check out Inherit the Wind, the 1960s film. It is wonderfully acted, it is very well written, and it will definitely evoke a response. So please check it out on Canopy. Okay, my final recommendation, also available on Canopy, is for the movie The Conspirator. Now, The Conspirator is sort of loosely based on real happenings that I absolutely was super unfamiliar with, but the movie was so compelling that I went and looked at historical accounts after the fact, and wow. The only words I can use to describe it would be hot mess. Because boy, was it ever a hot mess. In The Conspirator, we're dealing with the aftermath of the assassination of President Lincoln. Obviously, we're dealing with a country that is in turmoil. That's pretty common knowledge. Everybody knows the name John Wilkes Booth, but this particular case deals with Mary Surratt. Mary Surratt is the mother of one of the other conspirators who, at the time of this film, was still in hiding. Nobody knew where he was. They couldn't figure out what was going on, but they knew they had to track him down. The powers that be decide that Mary Surratt was also a conspirator. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. We don't really know. we do know that she's essentially being used as bait, and there are just all of these ethical questions that are going on, and it's just this sort of massive manipulation of the law. I found it really, really fascinating that I didn't know anything about it before, because, I mean, the situation itself seems pretty huge uh, to not ever be talked about, but yeah, I'd never heard about any of this. Uh, you've got Mary Surratt being played by Robin Wright. I love her acting. I think she puts in ridiculously nuanced performances no matter what kind of character she's playing, and she really needs it in this because she is playing a woman that you really don't know her motivations. Is she just protecting her son? Was she actually a conspirator? Did she somehow have no clue what was actually going on and being talked about in her own home? I, again, super complex character, and one that she plays very, very well. Her attorney, who of course is central to the story, is Frederick Eichen, played by James McAvoy, also capable of really, really nuanced performances and does a fantastic job in his particular role. He is young, he's passionate, he is dedicated to the law. He also has no idea what to think. And as the film goes on, he also starts to feel as though the law is being severely manipulated, and he's so frustrated by the fact that he keeps coming against walls when he tries to bring up the fact that, like, things that are happening should not be happening, like they should not be allowed to happen, and his frustration just bubbles over. And the people in his life, he's defending someone who could potentially have been part of this massive assassination, and the people around him don't understand why he's willing to be a part of it, why he's fighting for this woman. And at first he also has no idea why he's doing what he's doing. I mean, like, he doesn't have like serious motivation, but as things go on, I mean, his dedication just grows and grows, and in particular to the whole concept of what is right with the law. um I really, really enjoyed this film. Enjoy is a strange word to use for it because it was so distressing in parts. But I just thought it was fascinating. I liked watching the story unfold. It's incredibly frustrating in parts because, again, if you look up the history, you know what happens to the characters. But you still are so caught up in the situation. The drama is really, really there. The acting is amazing. Um, and it pulls you in. And I feel like a lot of times stories that are very much based in historical situations, especially hot button historical situations, are it's hard to make a really dramatic story without making it over the top. And a lot of that has to do with really well done writing and really fantastically performed roles, and I think you have both here. So if you like historical fiction, but also stories that have reality blended in, if you like stories that are based on historical fact, if you enjoy phenomenal acting, if you're a fan of either McAvoy or Robin Wright, if you are interested in that particular time period, check out The Conspirator. It is very well done, and I think you'll really, really enjoy watching the tale unfold. Okay, so those are all my recommendations dedicated to Love Your Lawyer Week. I can't guarantee that you will love your lawyer after this, but I hope that you will at least love the lawyers whose stories are told within these particular films. If you have recommendations about films featuring attorneys that you want to make sure that we all watch, please, please, please put them in the comments below. I'm always looking for new films to watch. If you are interested in sharing ideas for upcoming themes, please put those in the comments as well. As always, all of these recommendations are available entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. And thank you, thank you, thank you for joining me this week. I love interacting with all of you, and I really appreciate anytime you have comments to give. So thank you so much for that. And with that, we are going to close out this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.